This is my true story. I never thought my own son would one day raise his hands against me. I built him a home with my sweat, my back, and my years. I dreamed that one day he would care for me as I once cared for him. But instead, anger filled his heart, and he pushed me hard against the wall as if I were nothing. That day changed everything. I did not fight back with fists. I fought back with truth and silence. But before I tell you what I did, tell me where you're watching from right now. And please subscribe so more people can hear my story. A father's sacrifice begins long before his son understands it. My life was never easy, but I carried every hardship with quiet strength because I wanted my son to have a life different from mine. I worked in the sun until my skin burned. I worked in the rain until my clothes clung to my body. My hands grew rough, my back bent, and my body aged faster than my years. But every coin I earned went into building a future for him. I denied myself small comforts so that he could have bigger dreams. I lived on less so that he could live on more. I ate simple food while I made sure his plate was full. I wore the same shoes for years while I bought him new ones. I patched my clothes while I made sure his were neat and new. I endured sleepless nights of work so that he could sleep without worry. I remember when I first started building the house, it was not just bricks and wood to me. It was a dream. It was a safe roof that would protect my son from storms, from hunger, from the pain of poverty that I had known as a child. Every nail I hammered with the thought of him. Every wall I lifted with the image of his smile in my mind. My sweat became the foundation. My blood became the cost. My dreams were not for me, they were for him. I believed that the house I built would stand not just as shelter, but as proof of love, sacrifice, and family. In those years, I worked jobs that broke my body. I carried loads heavier than my strength should have allowed. I stood on tired feet until they bled. I labored in silence, hiding the pain from my family, because I wanted my son to see only security, not struggle. When I came home with aching bones, I still found energy to play with him. When I was exhausted, I still found the will to smile. I wanted him to grow with joy, not with worry. I wanted him to believe that life could be kinder than the one I had faced. Every father knows sacrifice is invisible to children. They do not see the skipped meals, the lost sleep, the broken body. They only see the roof, the warm food, the clean clothes, the toys, and the books. And I was fine with that. I never asked for thanks. I never asked for praise. All I asked was that my son grow into a man with respect in his heart. I asked only that he remember the sacrifices when the time came to stand by me in my old age. I thought respect was natural. I thought blood alone was enough to keep a bond unbroken. There were nights when I came home so tired I could barely lift my arms. But when I saw his little face sleeping peacefully, I felt strength return. That was enough for me. I told myself, this is why I fight. This is why I live. He was my purpose, my reason to push through pain. And every time I looked at him, I believed that one day he would understand. One day he would see that his father had given everything to give him a chance. One day he would stand beside me with pride, not shame. When he grew older, I invested in his education. I sold land to pay for his studies. I borrowed money when work was not enough. I denied myself medicine when I was sick because his school fees mattered more. I worked double shifts, triple shifts, so that he could wear the clothes his friends wore, so that he would not feel less than others. I thought my sacrifice would buy his respect. I thought my love would earn his loyalty. I thought giving him everything would ensure that he would never turn against me. But sacrifice has a cruel truth. It is silent and often forgotten. The years of labor, the years of hunger, the years of broken bones do not shine as brightly as the easy life it gives to the next generation. Children live in comfort and forget the cost. They enjoy the warmth of a roof, but do not ask who built it. They eat full meals, but do not ask who went hungry. They wear new clothes, but do not ask who wore torn ones. They live in security, but do not ask who gave up their peace for it. That was the mistake I made. I thought my son would ask. I thought he would see. Still, through all those years, I carried no bitterness. I loved being a father. I loved watching him grow. I loved the thought that my pain had meaning. I did not care that my body was breaking. I did not care that my youth was gone. I did not care that I was tired every single day. What mattered was that my son was safe, healthy, and strong. That was the heart of my sacrifice. That was the reason I lived. And so I built not just a house of bricks, but a life of sacrifice. Every wall in that home carried my sweat. Every tile carried my pain. Every corner carried my hope. It was not just a house. It was my gift, my proof, my legacy for my son. I believed he would protect it with pride. I believed he would carry it forward as a symbol of family. I believed he would honor the hands that built it. I was wrong. A son's heart is a mystery a father cannot always read. In the early years, he clung to me with trust. He held my hand, looked at me with shining eyes, and called me his hero. I believed that bond would last forever. But as time passed, his eyes changed. His words changed. His heart grew colder. At first, it was small things: impatience in his voice, a sigh when I spoke, a glance that looked away instead of toward me. I told myself it was just youth, just the struggles of growing up. I thought, this is a phase. He will understand later. He will come back to respect when he is older. But instead of softening, he hardened. The boy who once listened to my every word now rolled his eyes at my advice. The child who once waited for me at the door now left without telling me. The son who once hugged me without reason now walked past me as if I were invisible. It began with silence, but silence grew into distance, and distance grew into disrespect. He began to see my sacrifices not as love, but as weakness. He saw my rough hands and bent back not as proof of hard work, but as signs that I was old, worn, and useless. He mistook my silence for stupidity. He mistook my patience for weakness. He mistook my humility for emptiness. My years of sacrifice became invisible in his eyes. He looked at me not as the man who gave him everything, but as the man who stood in his way. There were days when I asked him small things: help me with a chore, sit with me for a while, share a meal. He refused with a sharp tone, as if my requests were insults. There were times when I tried to share stories of my youth, lessons of life, warnings from experience. He laughed, dismissed me, told me times had changed. He acted as if my words were dust, my wisdom useless, my presence a burden. The son I raised with love now spoke to me with bitterness. The respect I thought was unshakable now crumbled into ashes. The change in his attitude cut deeper than any wound to my body. I could endure hunger. I could endure pain. I could endure poverty. But to endure my own blood turning against me, this was a wound that no medicine could heal. His words grew sharp like knives. You don't understand anything. You are old. You are a curse to me. These words struck harder than fists. Each insult took away a piece of my spirit. Each rejection reminded me that the son I had dreamed of no longer existed. And what hurt most was not the words alone, but the tone behind them. The tone that carried no gratitude, no respect, no love. The tone that treated me as though I were a stranger, not a father. I had thought that blood was stronger than the world. I had thought that the bond between father and son could not be broken. But his attitude proved me wrong. Blood can betray. Blood can turn cold. Blood can cut deeper than any enemy ever could. I began to see how he looked at the house I built. Not as a home of sacrifice, but as a possession to be owned. He spoke of it as if it were his, forgetting that every brick was laid with my sweat, every wall carried my dreams. He looked at me as if I were simply a shadow living in his house, not the man who gave it life. The son I raised now looked at me not as a father, but as an obstacle. There were nights when I sat alone in the house, staring at the walls, remembering the boy he once was. I remembered the child who held my hand. I remembered the laughter we once shared. I remembered the small voice that called me Papa with love. And then I looked at the man he had become, cold, distant, disrespectful. I asked myself, Where did I go wrong? Did I give too much? Did I make life too easy? Did I love him so much that he forgot the value of love? Slowly, his disrespect grew bolder. He raised his voice at me. He spoke as if I were beneath him. Sometimes, in his anger, his hands struck me, the same hands I once held when he was a child. Each blow was not just to my body, but to my heart. To be beaten by a stranger is pain. To be beaten by a son is betrayal. And each time he did it, his face carried no shame. His eyes carried no guilt. Only anger, only pride, only disdain. The neighbors began to whisper. They saw the change in him. They saw how the son treated the father. Some pitied me, some judged me, but none could understand the depth of the wound. To the world, I was a man being disrespected, but to me, I was a father losing his son. And yet, even in those moments, part of me hoped. I hoped he would wake up one day and remember. I hoped he would see my bent back and remember the years of labor. I hoped he would see my tired eyes and remember the sleepless nights I spent for him. I hoped he would see my hands and remember how they once carried him. I hoped, but hope is cruel when it dies slowly. Each day, hope faded as his attitude grew colder. This was the change that broke me. This was the shift from son to stranger, from respect to ridicule, from love to betrayal. A change so sharp, so deep, that it cut not just through my heart, but through my soul. And in that silence, in that distance, I realized the truth. My son no longer saw me as his father. He saw me only as a man to use, a man to insult, a man to discard when convenient. The change in his attitude was the first sign of the storm to come. And like all storms, it began with a whisper before it grew into thunder. There comes a day when silence can no longer hide the truth. For years, I endured his words, his coldness, his mockery. For years, I told myself that love would return, that respect would grow again. But I was wrong. That evening, everything shattered. That evening, the son I raised with my own hands turned into the stranger I feared. It was late, the sun already gone, shadows filling the house I once built with pride. I sat quietly in the corner, my back aching from the years of labor, my heart heavy from the weight of silence. He entered the room with a storm in his eyes. His footsteps were sharp, his breath heavy, his face dark with anger. I could feel the air grow heavier around him. I knew something was coming, but I did not expect what he did next. He shouted first. His words were filled with fire, but not the fire of truth, the fire of rage. He blamed me for things I did not do, accused me of being in his way, told me I was nothing but a burden. His voice cut through the walls, shaking not just the house, but my soul. I sat in silence, hoping he would calm down, hoping his anger would fade if I gave him no reply. But silence only fueled his rage. Then it happened. His hands that I once held in mine, his hands that I once guided when he took his first steps, those same hands turned against me. He grabbed me by my shirt, his eyes burning with fury. Before I could even understand, before I could even breathe, he shoved me hard against the wall. The impact was sudden. My back struck the cold surface. A sharp pain shot through my bones. My body trembled from the force, but the pain in my back was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. That shove was not just an act of anger, it was the breaking of every bond between us. That moment told me everything. I was no longer his father. I was his enemy. The wall held me, but my spirit felt like it was falling. For a second, I could not breathe. For a second, I thought my body might collapse. But worse than the physical pain was the humiliation. A father who spent his life protecting his child now needed protection from that same child. A father who once stood strong for his son now stood broken because of him. I looked into his eyes as I steadied myself against the wall. There was no regret in them, no shame, no hesitation, only pride, only fury, only disdain. He saw me not as a man, not as his father, but as an obstacle that needed to be pushed aside. That look pierced deeper than the shove. That look told me the love I once believed in was gone. Time slowed in that moment. In the silence that followed the shove, Memories rushed through my mind. Memories of him as a child, clinging to me when he was scared of the dark. Memories of me carrying him on my shoulders when his legs grew tired. Memories of feeding him when he was hungry, of covering him with blankets when he was cold. All those memories collided with the reality before me. The same boy now strong enough to push me down, cruel enough to choose anger over love. I held the wall to keep myself from falling. My back burned, but my soul burned more. He turned away, still muttering curses under his breath, still blind with his rage. I stayed still, silent, staring at the floor, listening to the echo of his anger in the walls I built. My heart whispered a truth I could no longer deny. Patience had ended. Silence had failed. Love had been broken. The humiliation did not fade with time. That shove carved itself into my memory deeper than any scar on my body. I felt the bruise on my back for days, but the bruise in my heart has never left. That day marked the end of something sacred. That day was the day I lost my son. Not to death, but to arrogance, to pride, to cruelty. I sat in the dark long after he left the room. I did not cry, for my tears had dried long ago. I did not shout, for my voice no longer mattered to him. I simply sat, breathing slowly, staring at the empty space where he had stood. And in that silence, I knew a choice had to be made. The father in me wanted to forgive, as always. The father in me wanted to believe it was just a moment of anger. But the man in me, the man who carried dignity, the man who built a life with his bare hands, knew this was different. This was not just anger. This was betrayal. This was disrespect that had crossed the final line. This was the day I stopped being blind to the truth. That shove against the wall was not only a push to my body, it was a push out of his life. It was his way of saying I no longer belonged. And so, I accepted it. Not with tears, not with begging, not with words. I accepted it with silence, with thought, with a decision that would change everything. For when a son pushes his father against the wall, he does not realize that he is pushing himself into the abyss. And when the father rises again, he rises not with anger, but with something far stronger, resolve. That night, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I allow his arrogance to crush me. Never again would I allow his disrespect to define me. Never again would I wait for a love that was dead. He had pushed me against the wall, but he did not break me. He had hurt my body, but he awakened my spirit. The day of violence was the day of truth. The day my son's hands turned against me was the day my heart turned away from him. The day I was shoved into the wall was the day I decided, the wall may hold me, but I will build a new wall around my dignity. And in that moment, though broken, I began to plan. Not with rage, not with fists, but with the calm of a man who knows he has been wronged. With the calm of a father who understands that revenge is not in shouting, not in striking back, but in stripping pride from its roots. That day of violence ended my silence. That day of violence ended my patience. That day of violence began my justice. When the house grew quiet again after the shove, I sat alone with my pain. My back ached with every breath, and the bruise spread like a shadow across my body. But more than the bruise, it was the silence that weighed on me. I sat in my chair, staring at the wall where he had pushed me, and all I could feel was emptiness. It was as if that one shove had not only knocked me against the wall, but had also knocked my soul out of place. The room around me felt cold. The house I once built with love now felt like a prison. I touched the wall where my back had struck, feeling its hardness, feeling the reminder of his anger still lingering there. My hand trembled as I placed it against the plaster, and I whispered in my heart, "This is what it has come to." My son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy I once shielded from storms, had turned his strength against me. That thought pierced me more deeply than any physical wound. I had lived through hunger, through labor, through sickness, through years of struggle. But I had never known pain like this, the pain of being betrayed by the blood of my blood. The hours of that night stretched endlessly. I did not sleep. I sat in the same chair, the silence pressing against me like another weight. My mind began to replay my life, not in fragments, but in full pictures. I saw myself as a young man, working in the fields when the sun burned overhead. I remembered the days I skipped meals so that he could eat. I remembered selling my few belongings so I could buy him books for school. I remembered walking miles with torn shoes so he would have proper ones. Each memory rose in me like a wave, and with each one, I asked myself, was it all for this? I thought of the nights I stayed awake, watching over him when he was sick. I remembered the fear in my heart when he had fevers, the prayers I whispered so he would survive. I remembered the days I pushed my body to breaking, lifting, building, sweating, coughing, all to give him a roof and a home. Every sacrifice came back to me, not as pride, but as pain. Because all those sacrifices, all those years, all that love, had been forgotten by the very one I gave it to. I sat there and realized something bitter. My kindness had not been strength to him. My silence had not been respect. My love had not been seen as love. No, all of it had been mistaken for weakness. Every time I stayed quiet when he mocked me, he grew bolder. Every time I forgave him for speaking sharply, he grew colder. Every time I let his arrogance pass without words, he thought himself greater. My silence had been food for his pride. My kindness had been fuel for his cruelty. As the night deepened, I understood the truth. He would never change on his own. He had grown too used to disrespecting me, too used to seeing me as small, too used to seeing me as powerless. Words would no longer reach him. Pleas would no longer soften him. Only truth could reach him now. Not spoken truth, but truth revealed. I realized then that justice does not always come through fists or shouts. Sometimes justice comes quietly, silently, through the exposing of pride. I sat in that chair, feeling the fire inside me grow, not the fire of hate, not the fire of revenge that blinds, but the fire of dignity, the fire of a man who has been pushed too far and knows he must rise. That fire gave me strength where my body felt weak. It gave me resolve where my heart felt broken. And in that fire, a plan began to take shape. I knew his pride better than anyone. I knew the crown he wore was not his family, not his kindness, not his respect, but his possessions, the house, the wealth, the image of success. He thought these things made him untouchable. He thought his name could never be touched. But I was the one who gave him the foundation for that pride. I was the one who built the walls he boasted about. I was the one who worked like a beast to give him what he now claimed as his own. If he had forgotten that, I would remind him. But not with words, not with arguments. I would remind him by taking away the very things he thought made him powerful. In that silence, I also asked myself if I was doing the right thing. I am a father. My heart has always leaned toward forgiveness. But forgiveness is only real when there is respect. Forgiveness given to arrogance is wasted breath. I had forgiven him too many times. Each time, he grew worse. Each time, he grew colder. Each time, he pushed me further away from being his father and closer to being his enemy. That night, with the bruise on my back and the sting in my heart, I knew forgiveness had reached its end. I stared at the wall until dawn came, the first light creeping into the room. And as the sun rose, so did my decision. I would not shout. I would not fight. I would not break myself further with begging. I would act, quietly, calmly, without a word. I would act in a way that would make him see, not through my voice, but through his own downfall. The silence of that night gave birth to my resolve. He had pushed me against the wall, but in that push, he unknowingly gave me the strength to stand straighter than I had in years. He thought he had broken me, but he had awakened me. He thought he had silenced me, but he had made my silence more dangerous than any words I could speak. And so, I sat with my pain and my reflection. I let it burn into me, not as weakness, but as fuel. I decided that the next time he looked at me, he would not see a man he could shove aside. He would see a man who had taken back his dignity, a man who had reminded him of the truth he had forgotten. That night of silent reflection became the turning point of my life. It was the night the father in me stopped hoping and the man in me started acting. It was the night love gave way to justice. It was the night silence became my sharpest weapon. And so, as the dawn came, I rose slowly from my chair, my back still aching, but my spirit stronger than it had ever been. I whispered to myself, "This is the end of patience and the beginning of justice." The morning after that long night of silence, I felt a new strength inside me. My back still hurt from the shove, my bones still ached from the impact, but my heart was no longer weak. Something had changed. I was not just a father sitting in pain anymore. I was a man with a decision that would take back my dignity, a decision that would teach my son what he had forgotten, a decision that would cut deeper than any slap or shove he had ever given me. I knew him better than anyone else. I knew where his pride lived. It was not in his respect for me, because that respect was gone. It was not in his kindness, because that kindness had dried up long ago. No, his pride lived in the house I had built, the land I had paid for, and the wealth I had left him to enjoy. Every time he spoke to others, he pointed at the house with pride. Every time neighbors passed, he lifted his head high, boasting of the walls and roof that sheltered him. He thought it was his victory, his achievement, but in truth, it was mine. Those walls were raised by my hands. That roof was hammered by my sweat. That land was bought with my sacrifice. He had forgotten, but I had not. And now, I would remind him in a way he could never erase. I sat at my table, staring at the old papers locked away in my wooden box. Deeds, documents, savings, things I had kept safe for years. They were not just papers. They were pieces of my life, pieces of my work, pieces of my legacy. My son thought these things were his, thought they were untouchable. But his name was not the one written on the roots of these papers. Mine was. I still held the power. And in that power, I saw my path. The decision formed slowly at first, like a whisper in my mind. Take away the house. Take away his pride. Let him see what life feels like when the ground under his feet is no longer his. The whisper grew louder, stronger, until it was no longer just a thought, but a command inside me. I would take away the very thing he bragged about, the very thing he pushed me against, the very thing he believed made him bigger than me. The house would no longer be his. I thought about it carefully. I did not want to act out of blind anger. Anger passes, but dignity does not. I wanted this action to be permanent, unshakable, untouchable. I wanted it to leave no room for argument, no chance for him to undo it. I would not confront him. I would not give him a chance to shout or strike again. No. I would go to the law, to the papers, to the truth that stands higher than pride. I would make the change quietly, like water cutting through stone. The more I thought about it, the more my mind cleared. My son had believed all these years that silence made me weak. He thought my patience was surrender. But he had never understood that silence can also mean strength. Silence gives space for thoughts to grow, for decisions to harden, for plans to take root. And now, my silence had become a weapon sharper than his anger, stronger than his shove, more permanent than his insults. I imagined the day he would return home, walking proudly, as always, expecting everything to remain the same. I imagined his face when he would learn that the house no longer belonged to him. I imagined the way his words would falter, the way his arrogance would fall, the way his pride would shatter like glass. That picture gave me calm. It gave me peace. It gave me the patience to prepare carefully. The decision was not made in rage. It was made in clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I would visit the lawyer. I would bring out the papers. I would transfer the ownership. I would take the dream he thought was his and give it away. Not to him, not to his name, but to strangers. To another family who would live within those walls, who would sleep under that roof, who would call that place their home. My son would be left with nothing but his arrogance, standing outside the very walls he once called his own. As I sat there, I thought of all the nights I had gone without sleep to protect that house. I thought of all the mornings I had gone to work sick, just to pay for its bricks. I thought of the years I had spent building it, stone by stone, nail by nail. That house was not just a shelter. It was my blood, my sweat, my life poured into wood and stone. And if my son thought he could raise his hand against me and still keep it, he was wrong. I reminded myself of one truth. A father gives, but a father can also take away. I had given him everything. I had given him comfort, wealth, shelter, a name. But when that gift was turned into a weapon against me, it was no longer a gift. It became a chain, and I was ready to break it. So I made the decision with calm hands and a strong heart. I would no longer beg for respect. I would no longer hope for kindness. I would no longer wait for change that would never come. I would act. And my action would not just teach him a lesson. It would carve the truth into his life forever. That day, as I prepared to step out of the house, I felt no fear. I felt no guilt. I felt only the quiet strength of a man who has found his path. He had pushed me against the wall, but I was about to push him out of his own world. He had thought me powerless, but I was about to show him where true power lies, not in anger, not in fists, not in pride, but in decision, in action, in truth. The decision was made. The path was clear. The fire in me had turned into calm steel. I would sell his dreams. I would hand over his pride to strangers. And when it was done, when another man stood in his house, he would understand at last. A father's silence is never weakness. A father's silence is the storm before the strike. The next morning, I rose with a heavy breath but a steady heart. The house was quiet, yet it felt different. The walls no longer felt like my prison. They felt like my proof, my weapon, my story, waiting to be rewritten. My son thought this house would always belong to him, but today would be the first step in showing him how wrong he was. I walked slowly to the old wooden box where I kept the papers. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. The key was rusty, the lock stiff, but when it opened, I saw them. The deeds, the savings papers, the maps of the land. For years I had kept them hidden, safe, untouched. My son never asked about them because he assumed they were already his. He thought time itself would hand him everything, but now I would break that illusion. I spread the papers on the table. The names, the stamps, the signatures, they all belonged to me. Not him, not his wife, not his children. Mine. Every corner of the house, every inch of the land, every brick in the walls had my sweat written into it. And as I stared at the papers, I knew exactly what they meant. Power. Not the power of shouting or hitting, but the quiet power of control. He had thought I was weak because I stayed silent. But these papers proved otherwise. That day, I dressed in my simplest clothes and set out for the lawyer's office. The road felt longer than usual, but my steps were steady. People along the street greeted me politely, but they did not know what I carried inside me. They saw an old man walking with slow steps, but they did not see the storm that had grown in my chest. When I reached the lawyer's office, I pushed the door open. The young clerk looked up, surprised to see me after so many years. "You've come after a long time, sir," he said softly. I nodded. My voice was quiet, but firm. "I have work to do. Important work." The lawyer, a man younger than my son, greeted me with respect. He asked about my health, my family. I did not waste words. I placed the papers on his desk, spreading them like cards in a game. "I want to sell," I said. His eyebrows lifted, but he asked no foolish questions. He only leaned forward, reading carefully. The process began. Stamps were brought out. Forms were filled. My name was written again and again. Each stroke of the pen felt like a hammer, breaking the chain that had kept me tied to my son's arrogance. I was not trembling. I was calm, almost peaceful, because this was no longer just business. This was justice, written on paper, sealed by law. The lawyer asked me gently, "Do you want the property to stay in the family? Perhaps in your son's children's name?" I looked at him, my eyes steady. "No," I said. "Not him. Not them. It will go to strangers. To anyone but him." My voice surprised even me. It was sharp, like iron cutting wood. The lawyer nodded, understanding. He did not argue again. Soon, buyers were found. A young couple, newly married, looking for a home. Their eyes shone with hope as they looked at the pictures, as they asked questions. They were strangers to me, yet I felt more warmth in their voices than I had felt in my son's for years. They spoke to me with respect, calling me sir, listening carefully, thanking me for the chance. Their respect was enough. That was all I needed to know. They deserved it more than my son ever did. The day of the sale arrived. The sun was hot, the air dry, yet I felt no thirst, no hunger. I felt only strength. I walked into the office where the final signing would happen. My son had no idea. He was busy at home, proud, loud, thinking the world still bent to him. But here I was, writing his downfall with ink. The buyers signed first, their hands excited. Then it was my turn. The lawyer handed me the pen. I held it tightly. For a moment, I paused. I thought of all the nights I had built that house. I thought of the sweat dripping down my back, the cuts on my hands, the aches in my knees. I thought of how I had given everything to build it, not for myself, but for him. And then I thought of the shove, the wall, the silence, the pain. My jaw tightened. Without another thought, I signed. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was like thunder in my ears. When I placed the pen down, the lawyer smiled politely and said, "It is done. Done." Just like that. Years of sacrifice, years of building, years of giving, all shifted in a single moment. The house was no longer mine, and more importantly, it was no longer his. I walked out of that office lighter than I had felt in years. The road back home felt shorter, almost sweet. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. My son had taken my respect for granted, but now I had taken back my power. The house was gone, sold, turned into money, turned into a future for strangers who respected what they were receiving. And for him, nothing. Not a brick, not a wall, not a corner. That evening, as I sat on my old chair, I thought about the moment he would find out. He would walk through the door, full of arrogance, expecting everything to still belong to him. But the truth would strike him harder than any slap, harder than any shove. He would learn that what he thought was his was never his at all. He would learn that a father's silence is not weakness, it is patience. And patience, when broken, becomes the sharpest blade. I smiled faintly in that silence, not a smile of joy, not a smile of revenge, a smile of truth, a smile that said, "It is done." The sale was complete. The house was gone. His pride was shattered. And I, an old man who had once been shoved against the wall, stood taller than ever before. The sale was done, but the real story had only just begun. It is one thing to sign papers in a lawyer's office. It is another thing entirely to watch new lives move into the place your son thought would always be his. That moment, the replacement, was where the truth sank its deepest teeth. The new family came within weeks. A small moving truck pulled up one morning, its wheels crunching against the gravel I had once laid with my own hands. I sat on a wooden bench under the tree near the road, silent, watching. My son was away that day, busy at work or busy bragging. I did not care. The timing was perfect. He would not see the first boxes carried in, the first laughter echo across walls he thought were his forever. But I saw it. I saw it with eyes that had waited years for this quiet justice. The new man who stepped out of the truck was strong, polite, and full of energy. He wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, but he carried himself with pride. Beside him came his wife, her eyes glowing with hope. Behind them ran a little boy, shouting with joy as though the house was a castle waiting just for him. They looked at the house not as property, not as a trophy, but as a home. And that, I thought, was the greatest difference of all. Neighbors came out to watch. Old women, young couples, men with folded arms. They all leaned over their gates, whispering. They had heard rumors, of course. News travels fast in small streets. But rumors are nothing compared to the sight of strangers carrying furniture through a door that once belonged to another man's pride. Eyes widened, mouths whispered louder. Who are they? Why are they here? Where is the son? I kept quiet. I watched as the little boy ran across the yard, touching the walls, shouting, "This is ours!" His laughter filled the air, bouncing against the very windows my son once bragged about. That laugh was like a knife, not for me, but for the man who had called me weak. Because when he returned, that laugh would be waiting. The wife of the new man came to me as I sat under the tree. She offered me a bottle of water, her voice kind. "You must be tired, sitting here in the sun," she said. I nodded slowly and took it. That one gesture, that one drop of kindness from a stranger, felt heavier than all the years of silence I had endured from my son. I realized then that the house was in better hands now. It would hold love, not arrogance. It would hold laughter, not shouting. It would hold care, not violence. As the day passed, the house filled with furniture, curtains, carpets, and sounds of life. Every item they carried inside was a nail in the coffin of my son's pride. Because once neighbors see a new family living in your house, respect shifts. People no longer point and say, "That is his house." They point and say, "That was his house." The past tense is sharper than any blade. When evening fell, I walked past slowly, pretending to stretch my legs. I looked at the house, lit warmly from within, shadows of the new family moving across the curtains. For the first time in years, the house looked alive, but not with his energy, with theirs. And that was the beauty of it. He was erased, replaced, forgotten inside his own dream. Days later, my son came home. His steps were quick, his face red with confusion. He stood frozen on the road, staring at the sight of strangers walking in and out of the house. The neighbors watched too, waiting for his reaction. Some smirked, some shook their heads, some simply turned away, ashamed for him. But all saw the same truth. The proud man had been stripped. He stormed to me, his voice low but sharp, asking what had happened. I said nothing. I simply kept my eyes on the house. The silence itself was my answer. He turned back to look, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. But what could he do? The papers were sealed. The law was signed. The family was inside. His house was no longer his, and he knew it. From that day, he could not walk down the street without hearing whispers. Men at the tea stall would lower their voices but laugh quietly. Women at the market would glance at him, then at the house, then shake their heads. Children would point at the boy now living in the house and ask, "Didn't that used to belong to him?" The humiliation spread faster than fire. The man who once stood tall, bragging about his wealth, now walked with lowered eyes. Every wall he had claimed as his trophy now stood as his enemy, reminding him of what he lost. And the new man, the stranger, walked proudly in and out, greeting neighbors, fixing the garden, repainting the gates. The replacement was complete. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. I did not tell him why, because I did not need to. The truth was already carved into the walls he could no longer touch. Every day that passed, he was reminded not by me, but by the sight of another man living the life he thought was secured. That was the deepest wound, sharper than any punishment I could give. And I, the old man he once shoved against the wall, sat in quiet peace. I had not shouted, I had not struck, I had not cursed, I had only signed my name, and with that single act, I had replaced him inside his own pride. The replacement was only the beginning. The real storm came in the days after, when my son realized he could not undo what had been done. At first, he tried to fight it with his pride. He walked with his chest out, pretending it did not matter, pretending it was a small mistake. But pride can only cover truth for so long. Truth has a way of peeling the mask off. And that mask fell quickly, piece by piece, as the whispers around him grew louder. Relatives came from near and far, drawn by curiosity and shame. They wanted to see for themselves if it was true. They wanted to see if the proud son really lost the house he always boasted about. One by one, they arrived, standing on the street, their eyes moving from him to the new family living inside. Their silence was heavy, more painful than words. Some shook their heads, some whispered among themselves. Some even smiled faintly, as if justice had been served. My son saw all of it. He felt every stare like a stone thrown against his skin. He came to me many times, asking, demanding, begging for answers. He wanted me to tell him why, to tell him how, to tell him if there was a way back. But I stayed silent. Silence was my shield, my strength, my revenge. I had spoken for years. I had given advice, warnings, love, patience. He ignored all of it. So now he would get nothing but silence. And that silence spoke louder than any words I could ever say. At night, he sat alone outside the house that was no longer his. He would stare at the lights, at the shadows of the new family moving inside. He would hear the little boy laugh, the parents talk, the neighbors greet them. Every sound was a reminder that he had been replaced. That house was once his stage of pride, but now it was the theater of his shame. And he could not stop the play. He could only watch it unfold, powerless. Neighbors treated him differently now. Before, they used to nod with respect, greet him with smiles, ask for his advice, look at his wealth with envy. Now, they avoided his eyes. Some pitied him, some judged him, some mocked him silently. Respect is fragile. It takes years to build, but only one moment to lose. And when you lose it, you do not just lose the respect of others. You lose the respect for yourself. That was his greatest punishment. Relatives spoke behind his back. They said, "How could he do this to his father? How could he push the man who gave him everything?" They said, "He thought he was great, but look now. He cannot even keep his own house." They said, "The old man taught him a lesson no one will forget." Their words traveled, faster than wind, and reached every corner of the family. Soon, he was no longer known for his success. He was known for his fall. He tried to explain. He told them stories, excuses, reasons. He said it was a mistake, that he was tricked, that it was unfair. But no one believed him, because deep down, they all knew the truth. They had seen the arrogance. They had heard the disrespect. They had watched him treat me like a burden. So when his house was taken, they saw it not as injustice, but as balance. What he gave out came back to him, and no story he told could erase that truth. Slowly, the arrogance drained out of him. The man who once walked tall now walked quietly. The man who once boasted now kept his head low. He no longer laughed loudly in gatherings. He no longer spoke of his wealth or his future. He sat in silence, his eyes distant, his voice small. The fall had changed him, more than any lecture could. It had broken the shell of pride he had built for years. For me, there was no joy in watching his pain. I did not smile at his suffering. I did not clap at his downfall. I simply sat in peace, knowing justice had been done. Because revenge is not about anger. It is about truth. It is about balance. It is about letting actions teach the lesson words cannot. And he was learning now, slowly, painfully, deeply. The family respected me again. The same relatives who once questioned my silence now nodded in approval. They said, "The old man is wise. He gave everything, but when the time came, he took everything too." They said, "He showed us all that patience has limits, and even a father's heart can strike when pushed too far." They said, "We must never forget this story." And I knew they were right, because this was not just about me and my son. This was about every parent, every child, every bond of love that can be broken by arrogance. In time, my son came to me again, but this time not with anger, not with demands. He came with lowered eyes, with slow steps, with heavy silence. He did not ask for the house back. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply sat by me, waiting, hoping for one word. And though I gave him none, I saw in his face the truth. He understood. He finally understood. That was the fallout. Not just the loss of a house, not just the whispers of neighbors, not just the shame of relatives. The true fallout was inside him. The collapse of pride, the birth of regret, the weight of silence. And that, more than anything, was my revenge. Because buildings can be rebuilt, but broken pride can never be restored the same way again. After the storm of whispers, after the fall of pride, there was calm. Not the calm of happiness, but the calm of silence, the calm that follows when truth has already spoken louder than any words. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to explain myself to anyone. My actions had already carved the truth deep into his life, deeper than a knife, deeper than any wound could ever cut. And in that silence, I found my peace. I carried no bitterness. Many would think I must have hated him, that I must have burned with rage as he pushed me against the wall, as he mocked my age, as he spat on my sacrifices. But hatred is heavy. Anger is a chain. If I had carried them, I would have been trapped. Instead, I let them go. I replaced hatred with clarity, anger with silence, pain with purpose. That was the difference. That was why I could stand tall, even as my body was bent with age. The world around me began to shift. Neighbors no longer looked at me as the old man who endured in silence. They looked at me with respect, with quiet awe. They saw what I had done, not with fists, not with shouts, not with violence, but with wisdom, patience, and the sharpness of truth. They came to me for advice, not for gossip. They treated me as the elder who still carried strength, not in my body, but in my mind. Respect had returned, and it was heavier, stronger than before. My son, meanwhile, carried his shame like a stone tied to his neck. He tried to walk with it, but every step showed the weight. His shoulders slumped, his eyes avoided others, his words came out softer, slower, broken. He no longer carried arrogance, he carried regret. And regret is a punishment greater than any blow, because you cannot run from it. You cannot fight it. It follows you into the night, into the day, into every corner of your heart. I did not laugh at him. I did not remind him of what he had lost. I simply let him live with it. Silence was enough. Silence was the mirror that showed him who he had become. Every time he looked at me, he saw not the father he had disrespected, but the man who had stripped him of his pride without saying a word. And that look, that silent reminder, was more powerful than anything I could ever speak. Life moved forward. The house, once filled with his voice, was now filled with another family's laughter. The wealth he once bragged about was no longer his to show. The dreams he once claimed as his own now belonged to strangers. And I, the old man he once mocked, lived free of his cruelty. That was my victory, not in destroying him, but in freeing myself. I walked through the village with calm steps. I visited relatives without fear of pity. I sat among neighbors without the sting of shame. Everywhere I went, people nodded to me, their eyes saying what their lips did not. You did the right thing. You taught the lesson that needed to be taught. I did not need their approval, but it was there, like the wind at my back, lifting me, carrying me forward. Inside, I felt lighter. For years, I had carried the burden of his arrogance, the sting of his words, the pain of his disrespect. Now, those burdens were gone. In their place was peace, a peace earned not by surrender, but by standing firm, by waiting, by striking when the time was right. That peace filled my nights with quiet sleep, my mornings with steady breath. I never explained myself to him. Some said I should. Some said I should tell him why, should give him the chance to apologize, to ask forgiveness, to rebuild. But I chose silence, because silence was the lesson. If I had explained, he would have argued. If I had forgiven, he would have excused. If I had reasoned, he would have twisted it. Silence gave him nothing to hold on to, nothing to fight against, nothing to ease his regret. It left him alone with truth, and truth, left alone, is the sharpest blade of all. Years passed, and still I carried no anger. I carried only dignity. I looked back on my life, on my sacrifices, on my pain, and I realized something. Cruelty does not destroy a father. It destroys a son. Disrespect does not break the old, it breaks the young. Because the old have already lived, already endured, already survived. But the young, when they lose respect, When they lose honor, they lose everything. And that was his fate. So the aftermath was not just his shame. It was my peace. It was my freedom. It was my proof that silence and truth are stronger than fists and rage. It was the closing of a long story, the final chapter written not in anger, but in calm. And as I walked away from bitterness, I knew I had taught him, and everyone who watched, the cost of cruelty. Not with words, not with shouts, but with silence that cut deeper than a sword, and with actions that spoke louder than 1,000 voices. That was my aftermath. That was my peace. That was my victory. Now, as an old man, I look back and tell this story not with anger, not with fire in my voice, but with calm, steady words. Time has cooled the heat of those days, but it has not erased them. The memory is still sharp, still alive inside me, as if carved into stone. My son pushed me against the wall, his anger burning like fire, his hands filled with rage, his heart blind to the truth. He thought he could break me with force, but he was wrong. He did not break me, he only broke himself. When I look at my hands now, old and wrinkled, I remember the years I worked with them. These same hands built the walls that once sheltered him, cooked the food that fed him, and carried the weight of a family that he never saw. These hands never struck him, never pushed him, never hurt him. And yet, his hands struck me, his arms pushed me, his body turned against mine. That memory could have filled me with hate, but I chose not to carry hate. I chose to carry wisdom. The truth I learned is simple. Cruelty destroys itself. Anger eats the heart of the one who carries it. Disrespect cuts down the man who throws it, not the one who receives it. I thought once that my silence made me weak, but now I know silence was my greatest weapon. Silence was the mirror that showed him his own cruelty. Silence was the rope that pulled him into his own downfall. He pushed me against the wall, but he pushed himself into shame. People often ask me if I regret what I did, selling his dream, giving his house to strangers, letting another man live in the place he thought was his forever. My answer is always the same: no regret. Because that house was never built on love, not anymore. It had become a house of arrogance, a house of cruelty, a house without respect. And a house without respect is no home. By giving it away, I was not losing anything. I was cleansing myself of poison. I was giving him the lesson he had earned. In the silence of night, when I lie on my bed and the world is quiet, I sometimes hear echoes of the past. I hear his laughter as a child, soft and full of joy. I hear his voice calling me father, with pride. I hear the small feet running across the floor, the cries when he was hurt, the thanks when he was fed. And then I hear the other sound, the push, the shout, the cruel words, the moment of betrayal. It hurts, yes, but pain is part of memory. Pain reminds me that I lived, that I endured, that I survived. Now I share this story not to seek pity, not to seek revenge again, but to teach those who listen that respect is the strongest bond a family can have. Money fades, houses crumble, pride falls, but respect, if it is kept, keeps love alive. And when respect is gone, everything falls apart. My son lost respect, and with it, he lost everything else. That is the truth I want others to remember. I am not proud that my son lives with regret. I am not proud that he walks with shame. But I am proud that I never let his cruelty take away my dignity. I am proud that I never lowered myself to his anger. I am proud that I chose silence, wisdom, and truth instead of fists and rage. Because in the end, that choice saved me. That choice gave me peace. I have learned that revenge is not always shouting, not always striking back, not always fighting fire with fire. Sometimes revenge is silence. Sometimes revenge is letting the truth speak louder than you ever could. Sometimes revenge is not destroying the other, but letting them destroy themselves with the weight of their own actions. That was my path. That was my lesson. That was my truth. Now I sit in the evening light, watching the sun go down, feeling the cool air on my face. I think of the years behind me, the sacrifices, the pain, the betrayal, and the peace that followed. I think of the boy I raised, the man he became, and the lesson I gave him. And I whisper to myself, not with anger, but with calm. He pushed me against the wall. I pushed him out of his own house. That is my story. That is my reflection. That is my truth.